welcome to all the attendees and all the guest speakers from KPMG. This is Aditi Kala from Masters Union, and I'll be hosting the session for today. To start with, I'll just give a brief idea of what the session is going to be about. So, the agenda is to discuss a case study which answers how do corporates build effective learning programs. And we have Amrita Paul from KPMG with over 15 years of experience. Amrita is a certified L&D manager with exposure to solutions, consulting, and project management. She has extensive experience in corporate workforce training and is currently working as the manager at KPMG India. We also have Archana Bhardwaj, Stuti Prasad, and Nandita Kandal from KPMG who have joined the session to share some insights. Now I'll hand over to Amrita for sharing the knowledge piece for the session.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Aditi. Hi, everyone. Aditi has already introduced me. So I'll just get started with today's session. This is going to be today's session agenda. But before this, I just want to talk a little bit about the connection between HR and L&D. Now, we know that, as HR professionals, in essence, your role is to get the right talent into an organization. But another important aspect for HR professionals is also to build the right talent within an organization. And building right talent generally comes from having adequate and effective learning or trainings within the organization across teams or any kind of general training that you want to build. And this is the reason why we say that, there is a close association between HR and L&D. In most cases, or in, at least some cases, we always say that, learning and development is like a sub-function or a subset of the HR function. So how do you as HR professionals ensure, effective learning, effective training of employees at various levels for the organizations that you're either working for or that you will be joining? Today's agenda is actually going to cover these two important, in my view, important pillars that we talk about when we actually want to discuss training or learning. One is the approach that we follow to learning or to execute a training program in an organization. And the other one is to have an effective learning strategy. So I'll just spend about 10 minutes on these two pillars, and then we can get to the case study, which I will talk about in detail. Starting off with the approach to effective learning. Now, the approach to effective learning is actually nothing but the life cycle of a training program. So when we look at the life cycle of executing a training program in an organization, there are certain predefined steps or stages that we should be following. And these are actually these 5 stages. We call them like a 5-step process where we start off with, analysis. That is, how do we analyze or how do we figure out that there is a training requirement or a learning need in the organization? How do we define our learning objectives? What are the learning goals? How do those learning goals tie to, let's say, the business goals or the employee's professional goals? Then how do we get to building the training? So we obviously engage with certain other professionals within the organization, or it's probably HR folks themselves that get involved in designing trainings, building trainings, getting all the resources together that are required to even, run these training programs. Then we get to implement trainings, which is nothing but deploying the trainings. And within an organization, it's this sort of like a whole lot of other factors that are considered over here that, how do you create that general awareness among employees that, why is training required? Why is learning important? How do you go ahead and schedule trainings? And then, of course, how do you go ahead and roll them out to employees? And the last and most important step in the process is actually evaluate trainings. Now, we generally look at evaluation as, okay, there's a training that is rolled out. We probably get some feedback from, the employees who are the learners, and we try to see, how effective was the training, and then we go ahead and probably work on how to improve it. But the most important aspect of evaluating trainings is, does it actually lead to any kind of improved performance post training, which is not something that we as HR professionals can basically figure out in, like, let's say a week or a month. It's generally a very lengthy process, which can take like 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, depending on the requirement at hand. So it's basically all about figuring out that has the training led to any kind of performance impact on the job. So keeping this 5-step process in mind is going to be very important in, figuring out what is the approach that we as HR professionals should basically either be involved in or should be aware of from a learning execution or training execution perspective. The next pillar that we actually cover is having an effective learning strategy. We have a business strategy, we may have an HR strategy, but we should always have an a learning strategy as well. And that learning strategy comprises 8 key components, which we will cover a little bit about. I'm just going to cover each of these components a little bit in detail for, some better understanding of what we are trying to say. When it comes to an effective learning strategy, the very first thing is identifying our corporate or business level learning objectives. A learning or training requirement does not necessarily have to come from the fact that there is a performance gap in the organization. Even something like a new skill that needs to be built, or probably like a change happening in the organization. Certain other factors can also lead to or trigger a learning requirement. Not just that certain set of employees are not performing well and hence we need to reskill them, but we need to be very clear on what is the learning objective that the organization or the business is looking at. Are they looking at improved performance, upskilling people probably to the next level, building future leaders, or basically decision makers, aligning with business goals, or driving employee retention? These days, learning is seen as a kind of way of, employee encouragement, or ensuring that, employees are motivated in the organization. Because when employees themselves see that there are learning opportunities, there are certain other ways in which they can probably fulfill their own professional goals, which they have identified for themselves, it becomes a sort of, an objective or a goal for the organization also. The next component is aligning learning to talent management. Now, this is where every organization or most organizations have, they have certain competency frameworks, certain level of competency or performance mapping that has already been done in the organization. Now, it is important to align your learning objectives to these competency frameworks, because you may have learners at different competency levels, but let's say you need to get a certain set of learners or employees to the next level of competency. So how do you achieve that? You align certain learnings or trainings to them. So that is why we say that we need to align learning to talent management. The third component is where we formalize our learning requirements, and this actually ties to the analysis step of the development life cycle that we had seen earlier, where we try to figure out that, who is our learner, who is the employee base, which employee base do we want to actually upskill? Why do we need to train them? What do they need to be trained on? How do we build the training? How, when, and where do we deliver the training, and how to manage and maintain the training? So these are certain aspects which are going to be very important, because they not only help us figure out what is the kind of training we need to build, but also how do we ensure, that training is delivered effectively and is maintained or is updated in the long run. The fourth component is where we talk about aligning resources to support learning. So resources can either be people or they can be facilities and equipment. With people, we generally, within an organization, we look at learning designers, we look at developers, we look at trainers or facilitators. Managers, business stakeholders play a very, very key role, because they are actually the people who we also interact with to even figure out that what is the learning requirement, what is our target employee base who we want to train. Training coordinators and administrators, vendors, if the organization is not just looking at in-house training development, but also looking at outsourcing training development, then of course external vendors are also become a key support base. And facilities and equipment, we'll talk a little bit about, I'll talk a little bit about this later, but that is basically, the technology side of things. And if it's the administrative side or the logistic side of things, in case we are doing a lot of in-person training with employees. The fifth component is leveraging technology. So this is where we talk about development tools, tools that we use to build our trainings, having a good learning management system, virtual delivery platforms. These days, organizations are, for better reach across their, global employee base. They are, or even employees pan India. They are doing a lot of virtual delivery and gamification tools. Gamification tools are actually these certain softwares which are used to sort of like promote the acceptance of training among employees, because these softwares actually can be used to build in a certain amount of incentives, rewards and recognition. So you can basically tie your training completion to a rewards and recognition mechanism within the organization using these gamification tools. The sixth component is building a learning culture. The most important aspect is communication. How do you communicate to employees that learning is very, very important, or why a certain training that is going to be rolled out is important for them professionally, personally, important for the business and the organization? So communication to drive adoption and awareness. A lot of organizations use these techniques like, sending out mailers to employees, putting up posters, within office premises to, to promote that, this is the training that is going to come up and this is why it is important for you. They even loop in a lot of senior leaders to talk a little bit about the trainings that are, going to be rolled out. Another important thing of learning culture is to encourage learner engagement. So you can have certain techniques like on-the-job learning opportunities, networks that can be formed within the organization for greater collaboration, both prior to training and post-training. So that's a lot of, it's like these peer groups. In simple words, you can call these peer groups that can be formed where employees can engage with each other to learn further. Rewards and recognition, of course, we spoke a little bit about the gamification tools on the previous slide. And enhance your learning experience through personalized learning methodologies and accessible resources. Accessible resources like probably making training available on, their mobiles on the go. These days, a lot of organizations are going for learning management systems which are accessible on mobiles as well. So you're not tied to a desktop or a laptop. You can actually access your learning management system from your phones. Personalized learning methodologies are more like personalized learning journeys for employees. So let's say I, as an employee, am at a particular, let's say for a particular competency, I'm at level 1, whereas my colleague is at, let's say, level 3. So our journey to get from level 1 to level 5 versus my colleague's journey to get from level 4 to level 5 is going to be completely different. So because it's personalized, our learning journeys are personalized. We call this adaptive learning as well, where your learning path or learning journey is totally based on what your growth plan is or what your career growth is, based on the competencies that you have or the competencies that you have to get to. The seventh one is plan and execution approach. So this is where we actually talk about how do you execute the training program. So you have training operations and training implementation as two main things. Training operations is communication. We spoke a little bit about it on a previous slide, but it does come under operations essentially, and having training schedules in place. Training implementation is basically learner registrations and enrollments, their learning management system setups. You can have learning paths or curriculums set up on the learning management system for an employee. For people who are already experienced in the corporate world, you would see that, whenever you have joined an organization, there are these kind of mandatory compliance, ethics and compliance trainings that you have to go to. Now, you have to go through, I'm sorry. Now, those trainings are already set up in your learning management system as part of your curriculum that you need to complete as a new joiner. So that's more like your new joiner curriculum that you need to complete. So similarly, you can have a similar kind of setup for other training programs as well. Training, delivery, and deployment. Delivery is, of course, when you have instructor or facilitator driven sessions. And deployment is generally when you have more of, online learning. So they are deployed through the learning management system, or some organizations even go for external digital platforms, which are different from the LMS. The last component is evaluate learning efficacy. This ties to the evaluation part of that 5-step development cycle or process that we had covered. You first of all assess learning retention through assessments, and assessments are always tied to the training programs. But you can also have learner surveys or questionnaires which are rolled out to learners or your employees post training to get feedback from them on how good they thought the training was. On the job employee performance reviews and feedback is also something that I'd mentioned, that post training you can actually spend a couple of months just evaluating the learner's performance on the job in real world projects. So once the learner is back on the job post training, they get onto these projects, and you can sort of you as probably an HR professional or even a learning professional may not be able to directly get that information on how well they are performing. You may have to interact with their managers, supervisors, or you may have to interact with certain other people in the business area to get certain data on how well employees are performing. You can measure business impact, but this is an area where things like certain business metrics come into play. So the organization should basically may set up certain metrics related to, which basically sort of are connected to the learning or the training in some way, though the metrics will be closely based on the on the job work or the tasks of the employees and how that is leading to better business success. But indirectly you will get to know that is the training even effective or not. And lastly, monitor business changes that necessitate training enhancements. Remember that just rolling out trainings and just getting learner feedback or on the job performance feedback, etc., is not the only thing that is required. What is also required too is to maintain your trainings. So on one previous slide, we spoke a little bit about maintain and manage trainings. This is where it comes into play, where we take whatever feedback and inputs we are getting to ensure that those training programs are enhanced and maintained on an ongoing basis. So do we need to improve our trainings in any way or not, is what we talk about in this particular point. Sometimes if trainings are related to compliance and regulatory requirements, then of course they require random updates anyways. Okay, so these are the 8 key components that we talk about when we mention building a learning strategy. What I am going to cover now a little bit in detail is a case study of a training program that aligns to the execution aspect or the development lifecycle aspect and the learning strategy aspect. Now, this particular case study is of a training program that has not really been built for internal employees within an organization, but it is actually built for internal employees in other organizations. So KPMG India Learning Academy itself has actually built a capability development program called Certified Instructional Design Practitioners course. And this slide actually details out why this particular training program was conceptualized. Now, what KPMG India or the Learning Academy team noticed is that, these days organizations are putting in a lot of focus on learning, on training, basically on upskilling their employees. And, in the traditional way, it was more like there is a new tool, a new process, a new system that is introduced, or probably some kind of organizational change that has happened, and employees need to be trained on that. But these days, organizations are realizing that in order to even sustain or survive in the market, one key aspect is building the right capabilities among their employees. And so that is where capability development comes into play. And how do you build the right capabilities? Either you go to external, external parties, and you get your trainings built by them, or you have your own niche in-house, learning professionals, or basically a certain, team of people who can actually act as learning designers. So that is where we saw that, this particular niche capability of having learning designers, or as we call them, instructional designers, has become a key requirement of many L&D sub functions or even HR functions within organizations. And that is where we conceptualized this particular program. So this program was both for what was conceptualized for both fresh and transitioning learning professionals. So when I say fresh learning professionals, I'm actually talking about people like who are completely new to learning. But when I say transitioning learning professionals, I'm talking about people who have done a little bit of writing, in their professional lives, or have been teachers, they've been in the academics, or they have been HR professionals who have had little exposure to learning, or little exposure to learning and L&D in their respective organizations. So this program basically would give them formal training in learning design or instructional design, and it would basically make them more market ready. So market ready in the sense that, they can actually go out into the market and they can, apply for these kind of learning designer and instructional designer roles. And if you remember on one of the previous slides, when I spoke about the resources that support learning, the very first resource I spoke about was learning designers. But these days, we are seeing that, at least from the HR domain also, there are a lot of people who are coming in for this kind of a program, because they want to play the dual role of being HR professionals and, L&D professionals within the organization, or learning designers who are helping the organization build effective training programs. Okay, so how did we go about executing? We conceptualized it. This was a requirement. We then, formulated that, okay, this is going to be a program that we're going to build. So how did we go about executing it? There's certain aspects that you will see tied to the 5-step process that I spoke about right at the beginning. So that is basically analysis and development. So we did a lot of research-based analysis. We had expertise on market demand. So we already had the expertise or people who within the organization who could figure out that, what is the market demand for learning designers or instructional designers. We noticed that there was a lot of in-house demand as well. So there were certain, I would say, functions or departments within the organization or within KPMG India itself, where there was a requirement for that learning designer skill or instructional designer skill. So this was the analysis part, which was purely research based. Development was where we built a curriculum that actually mimics real world instructional design projects. So it was not a theory based curriculum. It was a curriculum that is very close to what an instructional designer or a learning designer would actually be required to do when they get onto projects in real life. And we had the training delivered by experienced practitioners. So people, I myself am one of the, the persons who delivers the training, but we had people who are experienced in, in the field of learning design and instructional design, people who have had exposure to a lot of corporate learning and development, who would deliver the training. We followed a kind of solution approach, which was a mix of all these pieces that you see here on the slide. There was a lot of conceptual knowledge that was passed on. We gave a lot of hands-on practical experience with a lot of assignments and real-life case studies given to learners. Peer-to-peer engagement, self-paced learning, where we gave a lot of self-reading materials, and of course, a KPMG India certification. So we call this a pedagogical solution approach because it was like a holistic approach that we had followed to deliver the training. Next is, how did we go about generating awareness for this training? We did a lot of social media posts, a lot of Google ads. We had a formal fee structure. And when learners, prospective learners or candidates would actually contact us, or we had a lot of connects, with the sales team to orient them on what the program is about, how it can benefit them. In return, the sales team would also try to understand, like how participants can actually be better aligned to the program. In some aspects, they used to also reach out to us trainers to speak to participants and to understand from them, what are their goals, what do they want to achieve from the training, and to better guide them on how the training can help them. In the implementation part, which is the final execution part, we of course focused on a lot of registrations and enrollments. It's a virtual session, complete virtual session based program. So we got in, we figured out what is the virtual delivery platform we want to use. Once participants are enrolled, we do send them a lot of welcome mailers, a program schedule, and of course we have virtual session delivery. And our learning management system is looped in, where we create a learning paths or curriculums for the learners, where their materials are made available to them. And they can access the training materials even post a session. So they're not just tied to attend a session, they can actually access materials continuously for a certain duration of time post the sessions as well. So this is an example of where we had, again, like I mentioned, it was not a training program that was done for internal consumption, but it was conceptualized for consumption of certain employees who want to participate in learning and development in their respective organizations. But the key aspects that came around, how we conceptualized the program, how we executed the program, how we did delivery of the program, the solution that we built, these all tied to the 5-step process that we had covered earlier and the 8 components that I had mentioned in detail for learning strategy. Okay, this is just something, before we get to any questions part, this is just something that I wanted to bring up for everyone, that, these days, even our learning landscape or the L&D landscape is actually evolving. So, like, for example, in the olden times, we didn't really hear much about virtual, session delivery. It was more like, either, like a live session with an instructor or a facilitator, or probably online modules. But these days, we have this hybrid approach where we even call it blended learning. And we have a lot of, for better reach, we do, bring in a lot of virtual session delivery, but there are certain other areas also which are gaining a lot of importance in the learning space or in the L&D space. Most organizations have not really gotten to the end of these, but these are still in discussion, and a lot of organizations are even looking towards exploring these areas. And these are what you see over here. I think only adaptive learning, mobile learning, micro learning, gamification, social and peer learning would be some areas where organizations are still, have already started, gaining that capability, or already have that capability. But things like AI in learning, LXP platforms, intelligent LMS platforms, VR and AR in learning are still gaining momentum. So organizations do also land up doing a lot of research. You would see a lot of research being done around the metaverse in learning. But it's, again, these are all research based areas which, where organizations are still figuring out that, where all can they use technology in the L&D space. But certain other aspects also, as I mentioned, virtual offerings are becoming very common. Along with that, even power skills are becoming very common. So when I say power skills, I'm trying to say that organizations are focusing a lot on behavioral skills or soft skills, basically skills that give employees the consulting edge. So that is what we call as power skills. And a lot of organizations are putting in focus over there. Then we have a lot of communication tools that are being used. By communication, I don't mean the communication to generate awareness. I mean communication where, we actually talk about the collaborative work among, learners or employees or their peers and colleagues, etc., on various platforms post learning. Coaching, mentoring has become very, very common. A lot of organizations are building the coaching and mentoring aspect into, their L&D area, where they are saying that, learners or employees do not just need to be made to sit through a training program, but they require ongoing guidance, ongoing mentoring from probably supervisors or certain seniors in their organization itself. So that's why coaching and mentoring is also becoming a very common technique which is being built into L&D programs or learning programs. And lastly, experiential learning. So this is more like experiencing the learning in simple terms, but it's actually what you teach is what you make them experience. So for example, they're not just made to sit through concepts or, like conceptual learning, but they also put in these artificial or simulated setups or scenarios, which again are not, they probably mimic what they might do on the job. So they're basically not the real world projects that they're working on, but they can mimic their work related projects. So they experience the learning that they have derived from the training in a sort of like a simulated setup. So these are certain things which are evolving. And like I said, some of these organizations are already working on. There's a lot of focus on power skills, a lot of focus on coaching and mentoring as part of training programs. But some of these are areas where the research is still going on. People are still trying to figure out that, how can learning actually benefit from AI, from VR, AR, etc. So that is where I come to the end of today's session. I hope this was information driven and or information heavy for everyone, and it has been beneficial. I think we can move on to the questions part now. So any questions, I guess you can post them in the chat window, or probably I can just pass on to Aditi and she can, guide us on the questions. Any questions even related to the program? Sagar, I'm sorry. You are saying what is I? Okay, so do you mean I&D or L&D? I think you mean L&D. L&D is learning and development. So anytime we say L&D, we actually mean learning and development.
Amrita, it could also be the instructional design ID which you were referring to in the middle.
Okay. Oh yeah, it could even mean, yeah, you're right. Yeah, so ID, as I mentioned, in fact, I can probably go back to this slide. So I think I mentioned in the resources required to support learning. So there are certain, or I would say group of people that you require to build training programs. And the most important skill required to build training programs, and these days we see a lot of HR professionals also wanting to build or develop that skill, is a learning design, or as we call it, instructional design. So ID is nothing but instructional design, or it is learning design. That is the very first, like a role that you see on this particular slide. These are people who actually go ahead and design and write your training programs in organizations. So they're actually aligned to the learning and development functions. So when you say, is this for freshers or experienced people, are you referring to the part of instructional design as well? It is for both. So whether you are a completely new person, new, let's say professional, you can build your expertise in learning design or instructional design. But even if you are an experienced learning designer or instructional designer, you can, like sort of like upskill yourselves. But if your question, Sandeep, is around the program itself, the human resource management program, I would definitely pass on that question to Aditi.
I believe this is for both. I think freshers and experienced both can apply for the program.
Yes. I think Amrita has a similar question. Having experience in core areas such as finance and banking. Courses meant for all the world. Okay. So there are two questions around the program itself. I think Archana to take up that question. One is from Amrita. So how would this program be beneficial to the experienced professionals? And the other one is from Akshat, that can people transition into HR despite having experience in finance and banking? Archana, could you take up these two questions, please?
Hi, Amrita. So it's glad to meet another Amrita today in the same session.
I know, I was seeing the same thing.
Okay, so Amrita, I think a very good question. Absolutely. What I see is okay, hold on. I have two questions that I see here. Thank you. So how could this program be beneficial to? This program will be very beneficial for anyone who plans to enhance the career within HR or anyone who wants to get into HR, because most times what generally happens that people really do not know how to do that transition. So this is a quick way of getting into something that you like, which is people, and get into HR, which is a 6 months thing. With respect to how can you progress within HR, Amrita, that you are seeking, it is more around the fact that once you know the finer aspect of HR, which is just not what you're currently doing, might be that you started your career with the recruitment line, or you might be playing a role of HRBP. This program is an immersive program which collectively combines all the traits together and will give you a real-time insight with case studies, capstones, projects, and will make you a all-grounded, well-rounded professional within HR. So that's where it will be helpful for you. I hope that helps.
That's good, Archana. Thank you so much. Shamina has a question. One-to-one session would be provided, and Claire is asking, shall we be getting coursework assignments? There will be assignments. So your sessions itself are going to have a certain component of assignments. You will even, and since it's during the session, those would be more like group assignments. And there is also like a sort of like a capstone project kind, built into the curriculum, which will come at different points across the entire program. And the capstone projects are basically, they will come at certain points, which will probably give you more of an understanding of how you can apply the certain set of, concepts that you have learned related to HR and L&D and other streams in the program till that particular point. So there will be capstone projects built into the overall program as well. I think the capstone projects will be mostly individual and not group based, but your in-class or in-session assignments will be group work activities. Parvez, your question is about one-to-one sessions will be provided to clear doubts. I think that's your question. I'm not too sure about that, but
Amrita, we will have those sessions.
Okay.
Where, we'll be covering doubts, we'll be engaging with everyone, and whoever is there in the call, guys, be assured there will be a lot of assignments, a lot of engagement, a lot of case studies, and a lot of work together, because this success depends upon we both, the KPMG, the Master Union, and you guys working together with us. If that won't happen, you won't enjoy it. And so similarly with us as well.
Great. Thank you so much. I think there was one question by Raj, which said, what role does an HR person play in learning and development? So an HR person actually plays a very important role in learning and development. HR does focus a lot on growth within the organization, on building the right talent within the organization, and building the right talent means how do you ensure that, learning requirements have been met? So that is what I covered in a couple of slides in today's session, where I said that when you want to build the right talent in the organization, you need to figure out what are the training requirements, what are the learning requirements. And that is where an HR professional can actually step into an L&D person's role. Yes, to become a learning designer or an instructional designer, the HR professional may need to build in that extra skill themselves of how to design and, develop training programs. But how do you even figure out that there is a training need in the organization? How do you even figure out that, there is a performance gap? All this is directly or indirectly, it is tied to what the HR does. It is tied to organizational development. And that is why it is very important for HR and L&D to work together.
Absolutely. And Amrita, there is one more question which Akshat has asked. He's
Okay.
saying that how is analytical data driven is HR in general. So Akshat, it's a very, very relevant question in today's time. How HR has evolved with time is also from the perspective of how data is being looked at today. Earlier, that was not the case. HR was always dependent more around what they were hearing or feeling. Today, the approach for HR is more like what is it that they can analyze? How is it that they can look at predictive analysis of even retention or an attraction that might happen or the workforce management that they need to do for the future hires. So every part within the employee life cycle from hire to retire or to retain, everything has an analytical component to it. So today you might have heard of empty number of HR driven tools which are basically into predictive analysis, which are basically into analyzing tools, which are basically into business analytics, not just from the HR perspective, but also how HR from the data driven approach is helping business to create better value for employees. So HR has really evolved with time.
Okay, one last question from Ms. Srivastava. This is regarding how to any chance of getting placed in KPMG. This question has actually been answered in one of the previous responses by Nandita. That we do, I mean, based on performance across the program, it's basically the top 10% students who may be eligible for an internship with KPMG in India. But again, even then, there will be, even for those 10% top performers, there will be a certain evaluation criteria or a certain evaluation, method that is rolled out. So there will be further, performance evaluation of yours to be considered for the internship.
Amrita, if I can add to that, I think
Yes.
Masters Union has their own placement cell. So definitely, once you complete the program, you will be eligible for opportunities for different MNCs from KPMG or other MNCs as well. So that is definitely a chance for a full-time employment post the course.
Amrita, you want to
The
pick up this
course.
question? What is KPMG? Sagar and Sameer is asking.
Yeah, Sagar and Sabir. So KPMG is actually an audit and risk consulting firm among the big fours, actually. I think the best thing would also be that you can do some Google on KPMG. That will give you, and read up a bit about it. That will give you a bit more insight on, what the organization does. There is a question. So the course will be completely online. There will be virtual sessions for the complete program. I mean, once the program begins, there will be, a schedule that we will follow to basically set up those sessions for participants, for learners. Attendance criteria, I'm not too sure. Probably either Aditi or Nandita can take up this question. Is that okay?
Yes, according to Masters Union placement policy, if you want any placement, 75% attendance is essential for all these virtual sessions.
Shamina, I can assure you, you will have 100% attendance. The course is so interesting that once you will be part of it, you would love to be part of it every time. So we can assure you that. So more of a pull than a push. So I'm sure you will have 100% attendance. I can guarantee.
Yeah, and I would definitely like to vouch for that. The kind of, curriculum that has been built out for this program is focused on so many aspects. HR, of course, being the most critical
Sameer, if you
part of it. Sorry, you were saying something, Archana?
Sameer has a question. Which type study? So Sameer, if you can elaborate that a little more. And Ankita also is asking courses related to what?
Let's just wait for their message. Sameer, could you elaborate little bit on your question where you're saying which type study? It's not very clear right now. Akshat, no, the sessions will be on weekends. So the program itself has been designed for working professionals also. So, you will have your sessions on weekends. So you will be able to attend the classes.
Ankita, you have a question. The first question that you've asked is course is related to what? So it is a course in which you are going to understand the in and out of human resources from a very practical aspect, not just what is written in the books, but exactly what happens in the life of a HR professional. That's what we are going to cover. Aditi, I think you have to take this question. How many rounds of interviews will be there for the selection?
There's just one round of interview upon which your merit list will be created.
Okay. Sahitya has a question. Is there will be a capstone project? Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a very good question and it will be there. I also saw a question from Claire in which she said, is it possible for the foreigners to be part of it? Yes. This is an online course. It is available to everyone across the world. Saturday and Sunday, both, Shamina. Both, right?
Archana, I think just two questions are a bit common. So one is, I think Sarvesh who's asking, I've recently completed my MBA and specialized in HR. What is new from this course? And one is by, I think Ankita, who's saying BTech graduates are eligible or only MBA?
Any graduate,
Yeah.
let me start with answering Ankita first. Any graduate, Ankita, is eligible. Anyone who's a working professional is also eligible. Anyone who has done already an MBA is also eligible. Now, how it is different, and if you have already done a post-graduation in, like Sarvesh has asked, I'm already a MBA, how is this course different? So Sarvesh, this is a comprehensive 6 months immersive course. Now, what you would have covered in MBA is not from the practitioner side. What is the difference between what people generally contribute as professors to what we basically doing at Master Union in association with KPMG? Like if you would have seen any doctor when they are part of their studies, when they are doing their MBBS, it so happens that the college is next to a hospital. Why is it so? Is it is because of the fact that they just can't read books and then come over and start operating. You won't like that kind of a doctor. But if you have someone who has done it all, had been trained that way, you'll be fine with it. Similarly, we at KPMG are practitioners, people who had been doing HR in and out for decades now, right? So we are there to be part of this program to teach you exactly practical aspect of HR, what happens truly in the life of an HR professional. So this is what the program is all about. And when I say that, that would typically mean that we'll be touching upon various aspects within the HR. So it will not be just the bookish knowledge. It will be much, much more.
The application part of it in a real world corporate
Correct.
environment. Yeah. So not just focusing on the the concepts and the conceptual part, but basically how those work out in a real world corporate environment.
Correct.
Samir, Nandita has posted a link which you can click in the chat window, which will tell you about the course fee details, sorry. I think there was someone else also. I think Ms. Srivastav had also asked about the course fee. So you can refer to the link that Nandita has shared. Great, Claire. Thank you so much. I think all of us as, masters and faculty for the program are also looking forward to interact with all the participants. So thank you so much. Thanks, Sarvesh. Thank you. Thank you, Mehak. You're welcome, Anjali. Thank you, Ashwini.
All right, if there are no further questions, I think we can wind this up. Thank you, the attendees, and a special thanks to Amrita, Archana, Stuti, and Nandita for enlightening us on the course. Looking for a really fruitful collaboration ahead with Masters Union and KPMG for this course.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And we look forward to interacting with everyone during the sessions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you to all of you. I'm pretty sure once you'll be part of this, you'll thoroughly enjoy this program. That we can assure.